$900 million? Number 960 million? Not that either. The final number in 1986 crossed the line of $1 billion. It was an almost unthinkable price, the kind of figure no machinist of that era could have imagined. That was the amount Textron paid to take over XLO, a machine tool company born in the Detroit metropolitan area. It was the enormous sum Textron was willing to spend to acquire XLO, the Detroit-born machine tool corporation that began in the hands of a man nicknamed Woody and a group of former Ford toolmakers. Back then, they could not have known about CNC technology or the billion-dollar auction that lay decades ahead. But they built the company on a sharp industrial instinct. Behind every mass-produced product is an invisible machine that determines its speed and precision. And they were determined to become the people who mastered that invisible machine. They began as ordinary mechanics, but through accumulated experience, inventive thinking, and extraordinary attention to detail, they did more than build a fortune. They helped lay the foundation for a transformation in modern industry. To understand why Textron was willing to spend more than $1 billion on a manufacturing legacy, we have to peel back the layers of time and return to a point nearly 70 years before that shocking transaction. If you enjoy stories about the companies, people, and decisions that shaped the industrial world, subscribe to the Gear Archive and follow along. The year 1919 is the first answer to the question of where XLO's value came from. It was not in a building or in a brand name that did not yet exist. It was in the experience of men who had seen the weakness behind the most famous Ford assembly line in the world. In 1919, in Highland Park, Michigan, a group of tool and die makers who had once worked for Ford founded the Tool and Manufacturing Company. That location mattered more than a line in a corporate filing. Just a few blocks from the new shop stood Ford's Highland Park plant, where the moving assembly line had changed the way America built automobiles. Newton Woody Woodworth became the company's first president and general manager. The company was formed by men who had all seen the same problem in mass production. No matter how fast an assembly line could move, it still depended on fixtures, cutting tools, gauges, spindles, and specialized machines that the public almost never saw. Ford is usually remembered for the Model T and the rhythm of the conveyor line, but toolmakers understood that repeatability was the foundation of scale. If a hole was not in exactly the right place, if a thread did not have the right form, or if a fixture forced a worker to spend a few extra seconds on every part, that small deviation would multiply thousands of times. A machine tool builder, then, was not standing outside the automotive revolution. It was providing the physical foundation that made the revolution possible. Woodworth and his former Ford colleagues entered business at the exact intersection between precision craftsmanship and the demand for high volume. The company's original name was vague and almost generic: Tool and Manufacturing. It described a capability, making tools and making whatever customers needed in order to manufacture. In its early years, the company took on a great deal of work connected to aircraft parts and fixtures. Some summaries suggest that this work may have accounted for around 60% of the company's early activity at certain points. That number should be understood more as an indication of business direction than as a continuous financial statement, but it shows that the founders were not serving only the automobile industry, even though they lived inside Detroit's orbit. Aviation imposed a different kind of pressure. Aircraft engines and structures required parts that were light, precise, and reliable, while volumes and designs shifted according to contract. The shop had to build custom fixtures, control error, and adapt to new requirements. That environment helped XLO later move across many kinds of machines: thread grinders, boring machines, facing machines, lapping machines, and specialized production systems. The common thread was not the shape of the machine. It was the ability to turn a difficult, slow, or skill-dependent operation into a repeatable process. That later success in expansion is part of what makes the question, "When did XLO disappear and why?" so difficult to answer. In 1927, the company changed its name to Aircraft and Tool Corporation. The new name reflected a significant dependence on aviation work, but it did not mean the shop had abandoned its machine tool foundation. On the contrary, producing parts and fixtures for aircraft forced the company to raise the standard of the equipment it used. A contractor could buy general-purpose machines, but when the requirements exceeded what those machines could do, it had to modify them, design fixtures, or create a new solution itself. Many American machine tool builders emerged along this path, first as users frustrated by the limits of existing equipment, and only later as sellers of equipment. It was a very American pattern, even by the standards of modern companies today. During this period, the company produced grinding machines and air-driven grinding spindles, and it also had connections to grinding machines sold under the Carbaloy name through Carbaloy. What matters more is that the company learned how to survive in an intermediate position, making parts for customers while also making the machines that helped both customers and itself manufacture more precisely. The late 1920s were a favorable moment for believing in industrial growth. But the crash of 1929 and the Great Depression quickly broke that assumption. A company dependent on equipment investment was hit twice. Customers reduced production, then delayed machine purchases because machine tools were major capital expenditures. Then, unexpectedly, founder Woodworth left the company in 1937. This was the first major turning point in the story. The founder was no longer present for most of the years in which XLO became famous, but the original structure of thought remained. The company continued to view manufacturing as a chain of problems that could be divided, mechanized, and solved. A precision tool could lead to a machine. A machine could lead to an entire system. A contract that seemed outside the machine tool industry could open a market larger than the machine tool industry itself. Pure Pak would prove that more clearly than any grinding machine. Then the biggest problem did not come from a block of steel. It came from a sheet of paper. Pure Pak. The development of Pure Pak was not simply a business detour for XLO. It was a large-scale technological rehearsal that changed the DNA of a Detroit mechanical company. John R. Van Wormer had received a patent for a folded paper carton with a gable top in 1915. The idea was compelling. Replace heavy, breakable, returnable glass bottles with disposable packaging that could be shipped flat before being formed. But a packaging design does not automatically become an industry. To sell milk at scale, manufacturers needed machines that could form the carton, seal the bottom, resist moisture, fill the product, and close the top at sufficient speed and with sufficient sanitation. The American Paper Bottle Company acquired rights connected to Pure Pak in 1928 and tried to develop the machinery in the years that followed. By 1934, the experimental machines still had not produced a stable commercial system. The company approached XLO, then a tool and machine builder with roots in the automotive and aviation worlds. This moment shows the legacy of Woodworth and the Ford toolmakers more clearly than almost anything else, even if Woodworth himself was not necessarily the person directly solving every Pure Pak problem. A paper carton was a consumer product, but its bottleneck was production. If one fold was not positioned correctly, the bottom could leak. If the paraffin coating was uneven, the paper lost its moisture resistance. XLO did not need to reinvent the idea of the carton. It had to turn that idea into a sequence of mechanical motions that could be repeated millions of times. In 1937 alone, about 42 million cartons were produced. Early cartons were dipped in paraffin for moisture resistance. The top was folded and heat-sealed, and at one stage staples were also used to ensure the seal. The design continued to improve, including the pitcher-pour style that appeared in the mid-1950s. Pure Pak did more than generate revenue. It changed XLO's business model. Machines installed inside dairies brought with them carton materials, licenses, service, and an ecosystem that could last for years. Pure Pak became part of a packaging standard used every day. By the early 1970s, packaging history research reported that more than half of the fluid milk in the United States was packaged in Pure Pak cartons. This success also foreshadowed XLO's risk. A company could begin with machine tools and then discover that its most profitable asset lay in packaging. Money and attention flowed toward growth. That made sense for a corporation, but over time it meant the story of the brand no longer matched the story of the original machine shop. These were the first signs of the direction that would cause the brand to slowly fade, and that part of the story will return later. When war came, the ability to design repeatable processes became a strategic asset. Producing nozzle plates, engine components, and specialized machines did not just increase sales, it placed XLO inside the network of companies that helped Detroit turn military designs into real output. When the United States entered the Second World War, Detroit became the arsenal of democracy, a vast production center that shifted automotive capacity into military vehicles, aircraft, engines, weapons, and countless supporting components. XLO produced war-related products including nozzle plates for rockets, aircraft engine parts, boring machines, thread grinders, and center lapping machines. In wartime mobilization, a good machine raised the output of the entire line it served. That placed machine tool builders in the deeper layer of industrial power, the layer that appeared less often in propaganda images but determined whether a factory could meet its schedule. War orders could help a company expand facilities, train workers, and improve processes. They also created an abnormal market. The government prioritized output and time, capital was coordinated under emergency conditions, and demand seemed bottomless. When the war ended, manufacturers had to convert that capacity back to civilian markets. Not every specialized machine had a peacetime customer. Not every expanded facility could continue running at full load. Success in mobilization only became long-term strength if the company could transfer the technology into automobiles, civil aviation, packaging, and industrial equipment. XLO managed much of that transition. Pure Pak served peacetime consumption. Precision machine tools supported the post-war boom in automobile production. Aviation demand continued with jet engines and Cold War defense programs. The company also began buying businesses that owned complementary technologies. If Woodworth had looked back, he might have recognized the technical logic, but struggled to recognize the organizational scale. What can be stated clearly is that after the war, XLO faced the same choice many American industrial companies faced: remain narrowly specialized and endure that cycle, or diversify to spread risk. The company chose diversification. For several decades, that decision created a giant empire. After the war, XLO bought manufacturers that had already solved specific technical problems. It shortened the path into new markets and turned the methods of one shop into the architecture of an entire corporation. In 1948, XLO acquired Robbins Engineering Company in Detroit, a business connected to jet engine rotors and to precision machine tool products and accessories such as magnetic chucks, sign bars, and sign plates. The deal directly joined two post-war needs: jet aviation and precise inspection and fixturing. Buying Robbins, therefore, did more than add sales. It brought additional skills and customers into the XLO network. In the mid-1950s, the company acquired Michigan Tool Company. Gear industry sources place the date in 1954 and state that XLO was especially interested in the patented spline rolling process. Michigan Tool's rotoflow line formed splines and tooth forms through cold deformation rather than by removing metal through traditional cutting. The economic meaning was speed, surface strength, and the ability to produce in large quantities, especially for shafts and automotive transmission components. That technology would live on for a very long time, passing through several owners and remaining connected to the EXLO name in Europe. In 1958, XLO acquired the Bryant Chucking Grinder Company of Springfield, Vermont, a precision grinding name with a history dating back to 1909. Bryant was known for internal grinders and later developed multi-surface CNC systems. In 1963, Micromatic Hone Corporation joined the company. Honing is a process for finishing the internal surface of holes to demanding geometric and surface texture requirements, especially important in cylinders and hydraulic components. In 1969, Greenlee Brothers of Rockford, Illinois, a manufacturer of woodworking machinery and related equipment, was acquired. In 1977, XLO bought McCord Corporation, expanding further into automotive, industrial, and agricultural products. This is not the complete list of transactions, but it is enough to show the trajectory. From a Detroit tool shop to a diversified corporation with units across multiple states and countries. Each acquisition had its own logic. The issue is not that diversification is always wrong. In periods of growth, different cash flows can support research and reduce the shock of the machine tool cycle. The problem is that corporate ownership does not guarantee those capabilities will remain under one roof. Once the value of each division becomes separable, a later buyer has an incentive to keep the parts that fit its strategy and sell the rest. But the architecture that created the empire began to meet its limits when manufacturing flexibility became a priority. A dedicated system could win absolutely on speed when volume was stable, while CNC won on the ability to change programs and adapt, forcing customers to choose between today's efficiency and tomorrow's freedom to change. At the moment the catalog was at its broadest, the economics of machine tools were changing. XLO's success in high-volume systems left it with a large installed base, just as customers were demanding greater flexibility. To understand why XLO was so valuable in the 1980s, one has to move beyond the image of the old vertical milling machine that often appears on the used equipment market. The company did make milling machines and many standalone precision machines, but its more important capability lay in high-volume production equipment. In the era before CNC became widespread, a specialized machine could far outperform a general-purpose machine because every motion was optimized for one part. Multiple holes could be drilled at the same time. The operator did not have to read a drawing and reset each operation. The trade-off was that the system was expensive and tied tightly to a product program. When an automaker changed a design, the value of the equipment depended on how well it could be rebuilt or adapted. XLO belonged to the group of companies capable of carrying out complex projects like that. Its knowledge of boring, facing, grinding, honing, and spline rolling combined into a powertrain manufacturing capability. That is why the brand continued to appear in machining systems for engine and transmission components even after the parent corporation no longer existed. The technology did not vanish. It lived in drawings, patents, engineers, components installed at customer sites, and service knowledge. But the dedicated systems model came under pressure from two directions. The first was the automotive cycle. A large project could fill a factory, then the gap between generations of engines could cause revenue to fall sharply. The second was the rise of CNC and flexible machining centers. When a machining center could change programs, change tools automatically, and handle multiple variants on a single platform, customers gained an alternative to hard lines. Specialized machines still won at extremely high volumes, but the economic boundary shifted. So saying XLO disappeared simply because its technology became obsolete is too simple. The company did participate in CNC, numerical control, and more flexible systems. The larger problem was that every technical transition was happening at the same time as ownership changes, restructuring, and capital allocation decisions that reached far beyond the machine shop. If the story jumped directly from post-war prosperity to Textron's offer, the deal would look like an outside attack on an entirely stable company. The real context was harder. The American machine tool industry entered the early 1980s facing a deep recession, high interest rates, a strong dollar, and fierce competition from Japan and Europe. Many long-standing firms closed, sold product lines, or searched for partners. Customers delayed capital spending, while CNC technology required new development costs. In July 1985, XLO put its manufacturing systems division up for sale. That date confirms that separating the machine tool business had already been considered before Textron's 1986 offer. This weakens the simple cause and effect claim that Textron alone decided to abandon machine tools. It does not mean Textron was blameless for what happened afterward. A new owner still chose the speed, the buyers, the investments, and the organization. But an accurate history has to acknowledge that XLO was already under portfolio pressure while it was still independent. The empire was too broad, some markets were difficult, and management had already considered selling the part that had once been the company's root. Why would a corporation born from machines sell manufacturing systems? Because after several decades, profit and identity no longer matched. Pure Pak had its own economics. Aviation and automotive components had their own contracts. A cyclical machine tool division could require heavy capital and make corporate results volatile. Selling it could make sense on a spreadsheet, even if it made the historical story harder to understand. The 1986 auction was therefore an explosive event, but the explosives had already been planted. Technological shifts, industry crisis, a complex portfolio, and questions about capital allocation all existed beforehand. If we blame only one buyer, we miss the forces that weakened many American machine tool companies at the same time. If we blame only the market, we miss the decisions made by the companies themselves. When control changed hands, the governance question changed with it. The divisions were no longer kept because they had grown up together under XLO. They were judged by their fit with Textron's strategy, their cash generation, and the value that could be recovered in a debt reduction environment. Textron began rearranging assets while needing to reduce debt. In 1987, Elopak acquired the Packaging Systems Division and the global rights to Pure Pak. This was not a stranger appearing out of nowhere. Elopak had grown out of an agreement to use Pure Pak in Europe beginning in the late 1950s, developing operating knowledge, markets, and customers for the system. For Elopak, Pure Pak was core. For Textron, it was a saleable part. Also around 1987, a group of XLO managers bought the European machine tool business through a leveraged buyout, according to UCIT Lee transaction summaries. Bryant Grinder was sold to Goldman Group in 1988. Bryant then went through a difficult period, closed abruptly in 2002, and was later acquired by Vermont Machine Tool. In 2015, Fives acquired the related technology, intellectual property, and service operations. That path shows how an engineering brand can die as a legal entity but live on at the product level. Greenlee stayed inside Textron much longer. In 2018, Textron sold its tools and test group, including Greenlee and related brands, to Emerson for about $810 million. 32 years after the XLO transaction, one piece of the assets that had entered Textron was still producing a major deal. The 2018 price cannot be used to infer what Greenlee was worth in 1986, but it does show that Textron did not simply buy everything and destroy it. It kept and developed some branches that fit its strategy for a long time. The North American machine tool business continued through multiple structures and eventually appeared alongside other production systems brands in MAG Industrial Automation Systems. These groups focused on powertrain, automated lines, and projects for major manufacturers. The combination had a logic of scale. Automotive customers wanted a supplier that could integrate multiple operations, but every new combination pushed the XLO name one layer deeper beneath a new corporate brand. The result is that there is no single obituary. Pure Pak left in 1987 and continued. Bryant left in 1988 and changed hands several times. Greenlee stayed until 2018. Cold forming in Germany went into MAG and later OSG. The Sterling Heights facility had its own ending in 2006. The empire disappeared not because every part failed at the same time, but because each part found a new life that no longer needed the XLO center. 2 decades after the transaction, the history of the machine tool side becomes difficult to trace because legal names, owners, and product groups did not always match. XLO machine tools in Sterling Heights remained connected to high-volume machining equipment. In Europe, EXLO developed the XK line of CNC spline rolling machines and preserved the Rotoflow legacy. These activities later passed through other corporate structures, including IVCA and MAG. The more accurate statement is that XLO machine tools operations in Sterling Heights went through a closure and layoffs that year. In Germany, OSG XLO lists the 6-axis XK8 as introduced in 2003, EXLO Germany as integrated into MAG in 2005, MAG and OSG as reaching a partnership agreement in 2017, and OSG as acquiring MAG's cold-forming technology and establishing Ozgex-Cello GmbH in 2019, as presented in the company's 2020 timeline. The X-Cello name, therefore, still appears on a specific business and product line, but it is not a complete revival of the Detroit Corporation. This fragmented survival explains why a used machine owner can say X-Cello is still present, while a former Sterling Heights worker can say the company is gone. Both can be right within their own experience. Machines, trademarks, intellectual property, and labor organizations have 4 different lifespans. A Model 602 milling machine still running does not bring the old plant back to life. A company in Germany using the EX-Cello name does not restore the 1985 corporation. But their existence proves that industrial technology rarely disappears as cleanly as a shop closing its doors. X-Cello's greatest legacy may not lie in any single machine. It lies in the type of company that once grew around Detroit, a manufacturer that understood its customers' product so deeply it could design the entire process for making that product. This kind of company accumulated knowledge through skilled tradesmen, engineers, suppliers, customers, and machines already running in the field. Drawings could be sold. Trademarks could be licensed. A group of engineers could move into a new legal entity. But the network that allowed the divisions to learn from one another did not automatically follow the contract. Today, anyone searching for X-Cello will find results that seem unrelated. Old milling machines, Bryant grinders, Pure Pak cartons, Greenlee tools, Ozgex X-Cello spline rolling machines, and records of a closed facility in Sterling Heights. That fragmentation is the answer to the title. Detroit's machine tool empire did not disappear in one explosion. It was classified, valued, sold, merged, and specialized until there was no longer one recognizable X-Cello. That is how X-Cello disappeared. Not every machine stopped running. Not every technology died. The company gradually lost the ability to keep its inventions, people, and markets inside the same story. From a shop founded by former Ford toolmakers, it became a corporation large enough to be worth more than $1 billion. Then the very ability to divide that value into parts allowed each part to keep living while the empire itself was gone. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe to the Gear Archive, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.